Just do the 5-4.
Oh, and I mean for like the entire.
Yes, it's going to be organic.
Okay, perfect.
Can
All
I
right.
drink
Because I have
coffee?
no, yes, you can drink coffee. Pull your table
Bring that
closer.
close for you.
Because I don't know where this interview is going to go. I'm serious.
That is true. We will see what happens.
Is that a good
This,
thing?
yeah, yes.
All right.
Rebecca, I understand that your mom's a Cherokee and your dad was Swedish, was he?
Yes, and Mom was a descendant of the Cherokee Nation and had the coal black hair and the brown eyes, and Dad was Swedish with the blonde hair and the green eyes. So it was quite a pair.
And you grew up in Akron, Ohio, which is not exactly known for Native American traditions.
We're the capital of the world, but not
Yeah,
exactly
right,
the hub of
right.
Indian country.
So I understand in your childhood you summered in the Smoky Mountains with your maternal grandparents. And tell me about that, because I remember reading a story where your grandfather and you would do silent walks in the woods for 3 hours. And it was during those walks that you felt so connected to nature and awakened to your own indigenous roots. Would you elaborate on that story?
But what I remember as a kid growing up was two things probably. In that one, Grandma and Grandpa lived in off the reservation down in North Carolina. And going to visit them though, my cousins would show up. And I was going to a public school in Akron, Ohio, where we had foreign languages and we had our math being algebra and geometry, and then we just had an excellent school system. And my cousins were absolutely smart. They knew where the best fishing holes were. They could name all the plants and show me how to make things. And yet they wouldn't know how to read a ruler or do fractions. And I always stuck with me how I wasn't political at all, but I just wondered, because these were my cousins and we could do anything together. So how come there was this difference? And it wasn't a political moment, it was an emotional moment for me, I think, more than anything. But then went on to continue growing up, and what I got while in North Carolina was a really good sense of listening on all levels, really. I think Native people have a respect and a deep understanding of respect, and there's a listening quality many, many times that we don't find elsewhere. Somebody's thinking about what they're going to say to you before you're even finished. And it was through my grandfather. Grandpa used to take me for long walks. We'd go down to the one fishing hole where we had catfish, which to this day I still don't care for, but we'd go down there, maybe throw some bread in. We could take our whole walk without talking. And it was important. It was an important time for me to have with Grandpa. It seemed to just be the way that we spent our time together, was on long walks. And sometimes in long sitting. We would walk a while and then sit down, and he would take his pocket knife off and whittle something. He never whittled anything like a figure. He just would whittle the stick down till there wasn't any stick anymore. But that's how we'd spend our times. And that's what I carried back with me. No matter what, I could actually call up that feeling of sitting in the woods with Grandpa. It was a ability for me to center and to calm myself. And again, as a kid, I didn't put too much thinking into any of the gifts that I was receiving in that kind of childhood. But to this day, I'm very thankful. Even now, I'm looking at health problems like any mid-70-year-old person. And that ability to calm and center is such a gift. It was a gift throughout my whole life, but now it's even more so, where I'm being much more deliberate about understanding what that silence holds for me, understanding all the gifts in that silence, understanding that moment with the Creator by being quiet and by listening. And I think there's something there for all of us in learning to connect through genuine listening. A lot of my work went on that basis of listening. As I got out into the world and as I became much more political, my mentor was really an incredible traditional man, Virgil Killstraight from Pine Ridge. He was the chairman of the board of an organization called the Coalition of Indian-Controlled School Boards. And when they had sued President Nixon for the Indian education monies, they won. And once they won and the release of the fundings was available, there was 5 Indian-controlled schools in the nation. They formed the coalition. Virgil was the chair. And they hired me as the first person to really go out and work with communities to start up their own school. Well, we had an incredible director, Betty Gress. It was Virgil Kilstraight, Gerald Clifford. There was just a number of us, Fannie LeMay, Dorothy Small. They were the 5 schools, Al Redmond. I could just go, Abe Plummer, I'm sorry, I'm going down there. But when I think of each one of them, that was really my political maturation. I was surrounded by these incredible leaders. And the fascinating part was the structure of the Coalition of Indian-Controlled School Boards brought a whole new structure in play. We were designed to provide very direct service to reservations, to tribes, or to Indian communities on controlling their school system. They had Bureau of Indian Affairs schools, church missionary schools, and public schools, but there were no Indian parents on the school board. No Indian parents deciding curriculum. No Indian parents selecting teachers that were going to be in their classroom with their child, forming their child's curiosity and future. And anywhere else in the United States, they had parent-teacher associations, and you had the parents on the school boards. We were denied that voice in the education and the future, therefore, of our children. So working with these incredible leaders who said, that's it. We want control of the schools. I said 5 schools with sort of a pack of prepaid tickets as the tribes started calling. And because we were so tied, the accountability was to getting control of the school in the community. And yet what that did was it provided the absolute best basis for building the testimonies and the case for Indian control. So we spent a lot of time both in the communities and going back to DC and testifying. They were very much a player in what became Public Law 638 around contracting, the Tribal Education Self-Determination Act in 1973 that was passed. There was a lot of the school leadership from the different schools and through the coalition coming in and out of DC, making a case for why Indian control over our destiny and the programs that were to benefit us was crucial. If the program's to benefit you, you should have a say in. Well, most of the time they missed the mark anyway. Most of the federal programs were just almost guaranteed failures. They were handed out to Indian country in a way that was very piecemeal, that it was somebody else's idea in DC, and they thought it was good for us to try it out there in the middle of Montana, Wyoming, or Arizona, with no understanding of our communities or even the surrounding communities' economy for that matter. So again, coming full circle, what I found through the Indian school movement was the brilliance in our communities, was a whole unique way of design, system design. In every community, there was the ability to think in the terms of like a buffalo project that would provide meat for the school and elderly program, provide hides for the skull and hides for the artist, eat the right kind of grasses, so it was an environmental program. I mean, it was all of these programs, and instead of just one, and you take that to a funder, and you say, I have, and this is a true story, in Cheyenne River in South Dakota, had a buffalo project, and they had formed wasn't exactly a co-op, but the legal structure was such that if you owned airship or part of lands on the reservation, you could put the lands together so the buffalo herd could graze on your lands. A lot of times Indian people own airship parts of land, but they can't really use it. So this was a way for them to put their airships together, have a large enough tract of land, and then they got a buffalo calf. So it was an economic project. The land got consolidated for use by the tribe. They would also look at if they they got a calf by putting their land in a thing, but they could grow the calf, in which then on the market was like a $1,200 income if you sold the buffalo afterwards, or about $640 when it was a calf. So either way, you had an asset. And that asset was kind of a new territory for Indian families to think in terms of assets.
Right.
So it was fascinating to watch how our way of thinking and our understanding of assets and our own innate entrepreneurism had been virtually untapped and completely ignored by these programs. No one was listening to us.
Right. And I know that you have spent your life building on that whole idea, but I want to go back to you for just a moment. I know you have so much to say.
Far more interesting.
I know, and I do want to go deeply into the indigenous way of being and living and thinking, and which of course includes the economy. But just to go back to you for a moment, because I do remember reading about you in that Indian-led school movement and how important that was to you. And I think one of the incidents you had way back then was walking into a classroom and seeing Indian children's mouths taped shut, and
True.
that led to the protests. Is that not right? That really...
It was like I said, no one would listen to us.
Well, how could they? You weren't allowed to speak.
Well, that was the whole response. I mean, even before we could talk, let's just cut it off.
Right,
Let's
right.
just tape it shut so we don't have to hear it.
So you became, and you had left college in your early 20s to get involved in that and to run, I guess, the field operations for the Indian-controlled school boards. But following that, you're a single mom, and you head for New York City and cash in your unemployment check. First of all, what in the heaven's name gave you the courage to head out on your own like that to New York? That's a big step.
I think there's real power in not knowing what you're doing. Sometimes that's the most powerful way to start.
Yeah. Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, you have no idea what you're getting into.
Right.
But don't forget, I'd already been working with our communities very directly with Indian schools. And what I had seen was so strong. It was unmistakable, the brilliance we had in our communities, and unmistakable how ignored it was. Yeah. So for me, it was a matter of, quite simply, I wanted to go and I wanted to listen to our people in different communities, different Indian people, listen to the tribal stories, listen to the community's story and experience. And in that kind of close listening, solutions actually emerged. It wasn't magic, it was just natural, respectful listening and an openness to the brilliance.
How did you get from living on an unemployment check in New York City to fulfilling that desire to do that?
Well, I worked with the Coalition of Indian Schools, and then I had this idea that it seemed like one of the problems where we were always taking federal monies to do stuff we didn't even want to do, and therefore when it failed, we got blamed for it, yet it was never going to work. I mean, you don't put marinas into South Dakota, and if that's what they're funding that year, that's the only thing you can get.
Well, let's jump right into that one, because I do recall that you were on Pine Ridge. Reservation.
The whack-a-mole story. The
Yeah.
whack-a-mole story.
I want you to tell that story. All right, so we've jumped from New York City, where you got some funding from the Ford Foundation.
Okay, let me back up then and get the beginning, because
Let's keep it.
yeah, if you want a chronology, you might not get it, but
I know, but some sort of connective thread. We weave around a little.
okay. Okay, so the coalition is over, and that was pretty much not exactly my official first job, but sort of the first official job I ever had. And in that, being so impressed with what I experienced directly, there wasn't a fear. There was just such a strong curiosity. I couldn't stop it. I just kept wanting to go back and wanting to see what would happen if we really took these ideas and brought them to actualization. And so it was almost like I didn't know better, but I did go test it. I took a year in went up to North Dakota and wanted to sort of check out. I had put together this sort of modeling where we were going to look for untapped resources to mobilize. We were going to look at embedding our economy within the surrounding economy and get cash flowing into rather than out of all the time. So and diversify the income base. So there were key principles that I was using to begin with, and I went up to United Tribes Technical Education Center in North Dakota in Bismarck. And I knew the executive director, Dave Gipp, really well. We'd worked together on this school movement in Denver. And so he said, sure, come on up. I know you can write proposals, so you can be our proposal writer. And so I got there and I looked at, UTEC was pretty dependent on federal funds at the time, mostly from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And I began looking at different ways we could generate revenue. So we took our, actually we took the powwow. Every year they had this spectacular powwow in North Dakota. And people from Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, and even further came to the powwow. Well, I thought, well, wait a minute. Let's see if we could make some money off the powwow. And I went to the North Dakota State Tourism Department, and they matched us $4 to every $1 for marketing the powwow. So then we thought, well, what do we need? And the people come and they say, well, we bring our kids. We don't have any activities for the kids. So we came up with an activity book, like you connect the dots and you got moccasins, or you followed a maze through a star quilt, and all these little activities. But the local businesses had to sponsor them. So like we put together this activity book, and by the time it was done, we'd made maybe like $12,000 off of it. Now, pay attention to this. Is the first time we're actually generating non-federal dollars and earning money. Then we boosted up the entrance fee for non-powwow participants. So in other words, all the non-Indian people. And we also set it up so we went through the parking areas and the campsites, and we counted all the out-of-state plates. And we became North Dakota's only tourist destination attraction. Nobody came to North Dakota to be there, right? So they would go through to Yellowstone, or they went down to Black Hills, but nobody came to North Dakota except for the UTEC powwow. And so by the time it was all over, I don't remember the exact amount, but I think we came in around high 70,000, which was significant. And back in those days, that's very significant. Yes. And so we began really looking at these principles and writing up the results. And I thought, there's something here. There's potential to earn revenue in a whole lot of our operations. And we needed to break our dependency off this federal dollars. Now, believe me, treaty rights demand the obligation that has been committed in those treaty rights is that we are obligated to have federal funds brought to us by this government for the treaties and for the land and the historic understandings of our relationship with the federal government. So that money was due us. It wasn't that that was the fault. The fault was it was the only resources we had. And we needed the independence, and we needed to achieve sovereignty. We have to have financial independence too. Right. And so that's kind of where I was looking at this. In addition, I already knew that the economic models we were looking at carried their own values, and that our values were different, and that culture was our strength, not our weakness. Because this was back in the days where everybody knew Indians couldn't do business because we shared too much and we cooperated. It seemed to me like those were good things, and that businesses could be successful by sharing and cooperating. So I really wanted to keep us, by listening, let our indigenous communities form their own solutions, because I just believed they would. I now had results of all the different revenue generating little income operations we had at UTEC. David was just a wonderful partner and team member in all of this, and excited. In fact, I probably could have stayed there, but I really wanted to see how this would expand. And so that's when I actually left. And
is that when you went to Pine Ridge for your?
Oh, no, I actually went home because I had gotten engaged, and the fellow I was engaged to was killed in a hunting accident, and I just needed to take some time off. And so he let me go, and that's when I went home, and that's when the story became, I started getting, through his generosity of letting me go like that, I was able to get unemployment, and it was my last unemployment check. I just had been sitting there thinking about this and thinking about it, and finally it was like, I got to give it a try. So I took my check and cashed it in and got myself an airplane ticket, and I went up to New York. And at that time, there was very little philanthropy involved in Indian country. I'd become aware of it because Ford had done some interesting work with the Indian-controlled schools, and they had funded 2 of the only Indian-controlled schools in the nation. So I kind of followed that trail and ended up, my first program officer was Susan Beresford, who then became president right after she made the grant to us. I used to go around and tell everybody, you can be president too if you bear us another grant, you know, but never quite worked that way. But that really was the start of, back in those days it was called the Native American Financial Self-Sufficiency Project, that became First Nations. And it was a journey because no one was really committed to starting and staying within a cultural base and understanding, and then looking at economic development.
Okay, when you said First Nations, so it was called, that you founded, First Nations Development Institute.
No, it grew into being an institute. At the beginning, it was just the Native American Financial Self-Sufficiency Project.
Okay.
And I got $50,000 from Ford and went to Pine Ridge. And because Virgil was there, I asked him to be chair of First Nations, and he agreed, and he was director of Little Wound School at the time in Kyle, South Dakota, right in the middle of Pine Ridge. And I showed up and I said, this is what I was looking at and thinking about. And we actually started, a lot of people, well, and I also, let me say, I drew up a 10-year plan of reservation development when I gave the proposal to Ford. And I said there was key components. We needed field work, and by doing the field work, we would come up with authentic models of culturally appropriate development, because the communities would be the one driving the development. And everywhere else we looked, they were Western models of business being put down on top of us rather than building from within us. And any venture capitalist even knows you go with the human capital first. So by looking at ourselves and looking at a total undying belief that culture was our strength, not our problem, I wanted to open up and raise money that we could use in a way that allowed us to move in any direction that the community was working at and thinking about and wanting to develop. So I was at Pine Ridge with Virgil, and Little Wound School was at the time a BIA and now contract school. And so
Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Bureau of Indian Affairs, BIA school. And they had this incredible art teacher, Dawn Little Sky, and she was working with the children. I was in there looking at the art, and I was like, this is just beautiful, Dawn. And I said, what do you do? She says, well, every month we have a showing, and we pick kids' art, and we put it up on the wall, and we have some fruit punch and cookies, and people come see the show. She said, it's just so good. I said, well, you know, I think there's something here we could look at. And we got into this idea of building this traveling art exhibit. And then each one of these was an adventure, because you learn so much. Like, you have to be able to assemble a traveling exhibit in under 15 minutes, and has to be able to be done by a 6th grade education level. So putting this exhibit together that ended up symbolically looking like a teepee that you would walk in and could be assembled, and we leased it to shopping malls. And the first year we got $45,000, and the next year it grew, yeah. And so again, we were looking at ways to build these revenue streams so that Little Wound would have the BIA contract, but then it also had other monies to do the kind of things that creative teachers come up with. And that education really needs that kind of moment to move with the child in learning. And so that was under the Native American Financial Self-Sufficiency Project at the time. Well, the results were pretty stunning. And while we were there working with Little Wound School, we also began doing some just basic economic 101 kinds of technical studies. We did a flow of funds studies, and we saw that less than 7 cents on the dollar actually stayed in Pine Ridge, with 93 cents on the dollar going to the border town economy.
There was nowhere to spend the money.
Right, the border town economies were making it because of our customer base, and we weren't even getting our checks cashed. We couldn't get lines of credit, none of that for the Indian customer. And so we looked at that. We also looked at banks. in the loan to deposit ratio to see how much of the community's deposits were on hand at the bank and how much did they actually lend back, which became one of the factors in the Community Reinvestment Act, was this what they called upstreaming the capital, so that all these banks, the headquarter might be in Minnesota, so all the banks suck the money out of those states and take it to their headquarters. So we were really looking at a reservation as the actual microscopic version of all of how extractive and exploitative the economic system is that we operate under. So in looking at those informations, Virgil, again, who was just the Renaissance man in so many ways, was on the college the tribal college board, and they were doing a conference on economic development, and he'd asked us to present. And so we were presenting how much money did not stay, how much money left the reservation. We were presenting the money on what the bank itself actually had built a whole branch based on the tribe's deposits and accounts, and yet was making no loans back.
Yeah.
So that really sparked at that moment in that economic development tribal college conference, they began talking about some kind of lending mechanism. They wanted to do a lending program so they could capture their own economy and begin holding some of that economy and have the turnover, get at least a one-time turnover of the dollar on the reservation, which really and truly is the story behind the Lakota Fund. It's had so many different stories of origin, so many different people have created the Lakota Fund. You can probably can't even count them on two hands anymore, all the people that created the Lakota Fund. But the real foundation for the Lakota Fund started at that workshop with the Lakota people and them looking at the information and coming up with the solution. We didn't have the name microlending.
Right.
We didn't even know what kind of loan fund we were actually going to do, but I heard that loud and clear. Mm-hmm. And so we began looking around, and there was a couple interesting financial intermediaries in the country at the time. There was the industrial co-op that was looking at collective ownership and doing some very interesting work in and of itself. And then there was South Shore Bank in Chicago that was looking at lending within the community with a targeted low-income customer base. And so I began putting together this development process, and we hired this fellow who actually moved to Pine Ridge, and for about a year and a half did community organizing with Virgil, going to every tribal community on Pine Ridge and sitting there at different times during the month, several times throughout the year, and listening to how they would look at it. They wanted something they could borrow from. They wanted, but they didn't have regular collateral, and they didn't need $250,000 loans. They needed, in some cases, very small loans, $500 loans, $2,000 loans. So this started coming out of the community organizing process. We still weren't clear on what this was going to be and what it was going to look like. And so then, at the same time, I had mentioned that I had put in a 10-year plan to Ford Foundation. One part of that plan, in addition to building models with our culture and our values, was capital formation. And we wanted to really look at capital formation on the reservation. And I had just negotiated $1 million program-related investment from Ford for that part of our work, which we called OWISTA, which is the Mohawk word for money. I wanted to name it like it'd take 3 different languages and call it money, money, money in our different languages, but every now and then I got carried away and the crew would call me back into so OWISTA.
That's quite an accomplishment, $1 million.
In a program, and this is without anything. I mean, in a sense, we had no models, we had nothing on the ground.
You are a salesperson.
It makes sense. It
Well,
makes
obviously, you convinced
sense.
others, yes.
And so there we were. And at the time, just before the money came through, I actually went back to them and I said, look, I'm never comfortable working in just a theoretical arena, and we don't have anything on the ground around capital formation yet. Could I take this $1 million and put it into the Lakota Fund? And we want to start this actual loan fund on the ground to see what we learn from it. And they let me. So I redirected the million. We redid all the paperwork, which is a nightmare in itself. And we took the loan for the purpose of capitalizing the Lakota Fund. And in a way, you can say the rest is history in the sense of it really was the first microloan fund, but we didn't even know what it was called back then.
Right, but you had heard about Grameen.
No, not at all.
Grameen after that, didn't you connect
Well,
with
that,
Grameen?
yeah, but that was way later because
Okay.
because what got lost in this story, Lakota Fund became very famous in its own right. There was 3 groups at the time. There was WEDCO, which was a women's employment development company, and they were making small loans. And then Axion had something down in the Southwest, which was more of like a linkage deposit program. You put a deposit in, and the local bank then would agree to make loans to that community. So we had that in a rough sense, and then we were doing what we were doing on the Lakota Fund, and that started coming forward. So we opened a test run to see what the pipeline was going to be like on the loans, and we hadn't really pictured it exactly. And we got in this about 4 applications for convenience stores. Some very enterprising person had gone to the major intersections on the reservation, had taken Polaroids back in that day, Polaroids of each intersection, and put in a loan application for a convenience store. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, this isn't it. It's not about convenience stores. First of all, you can only have so many, you're going to saturate the market, but it wasn't about convenience stores. And so I stopped everything again, and I said, wait a minute, let's back up. What do you do to make money here? And there was another brilliant, there's a lot of brilliance out there, another Indian man that was getting his master's degree in economic development. And I started talking to him, and he created this informal sector study, and he went out and basically the question was, what do you do to make money? And he began looking at 83% of the households earned about 87% of their income from these informal activities. They made coffins for the cemetery. They welded crosses for the cemetery. They mended fences. They did hair. They babysat. They sold lunches to the Indian Health Service or the Bureau of Indian Affairs people. There was 118 vibrant activities that were being done every day to make money. And I was like, that's it. That's it.
87% of the household income came from activities like that's amazing.
Those activities.
Yeah.
And nobody had looked at them.
No.
Nobody had considered them anything. And I was like, that's it.
Yeah.
That's what we want to lend to. This is it.
Right.
And it was just all there, all of it in front of us, all this creativity, entrepreneurship. Now, we had to go on the Keeley radio and talk about entrepreneurs because we hadn't even looked at ourselves as entrepreneurs yet. We had to work with the tribal government about debt collection codes and bad check codes and the kind of infrastructure you would find anywhere else, but we had to get it put in place. So all of these pieces were being built around the Lakota Fund through the tribe. The council was very supportive. They passed the codes. The college, we had a student, Gerald Sherman, who became the first executive director. He was a student at the college coming to all of our community organizing meetings. And it was like, that sort of really, it was like all of a sudden, boom, we had it. We had the pipeline. We knew our borrowers. And so we began lending. And then like everything, the stories, unfold. We had to retweak the collateral, but it was all very exciting. We had star quilts, horse saddles, you name it. The collateral was collateral. Then Ford, who was funding us during all of this, was also funding the Grameen Bank. And so then they said, had you ever heard of Dr. Yunus? Yes. And Muhammad Yunus? And I was like, no. Have you ever heard of the Grameen Bank? No. And they said, well, he's doing what you're doing. He's doing this circle lending. And I was, well, we weren't quite doing circle lending, but sometimes they came in and more than one borrower, but we didn't really have any.
Micro-enterprise.
Yeah, we didn't. We were, and he said, well, do you have a micro enterprise? I was like, sure, finally.
Definitely.
Yeah, it was so funny to take that down to Navajo and have them translate micro enterprise. The Navajo was hilarious. But it was a brand new term. We were brand new at what we were doing. And yet here Muhammad had gotten much further than us and was really looking. But what was fascinating, he came over to Pine Ridge. He had never done an informal sector study. He had never looked at their.
So this man travels from India
Yeah.
to Pine Ridge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now in Pine Ridge, there's 1.8 people per square mile. In Bangladesh, it's 1,800 people per square mile.
Right.
So Dr. Yunus shows up in Pine Ridge and he's freaked out. He's never been so isolated in his life. He stuck to me like we were Siamese twins or something. I was like, it's okay, it's okay.
okay to have space.
Yeah, you could go over there and get the food, you know. And then we spent the night at the college, which is way out in the middle of nowhere. I thought he was going to have a heart attack or something. He was just wonderful traveler and everything, you know. But it was so interesting to watch the difference in his reaction. And then we were to go to Bangladesh and see the Grameen. Well, I got sick and couldn't go, but Gerald by now was the executive director, and some of the Lakota Fund staff and board people were going. And like I said, it's 1,800 people per square mile, and it was hilarious to watch them. They said they would drive and be told they're out in the middle of the woods, you know, and he said, you'd be standing under the hut, and you had people shoulder to shoulder. And we're like, it's just packed everywhere you went. You know? And I got the biggest kick out of that story. And then, in a way, like the rest is history. The Lakota Fund really, for a long time, was the first, but for a long time, it was the only successful economic development Pine Ridge had ever experienced. But like, we had a woman that made sandwiches for Indian Health, and she basically catered the lunches down there. Well, she had about 6 kids that were living with her, single mom, and she was getting maybe $625 a month to live off of. So we started helping her expand her business through a loan. She came in and got one of the first early loans, and she increased over $200 a month through her business. $200 is a significant amount when you're living off of $625. So we started seeing really immediate results that were dramatic for the scale of our economy and what the usual size was. And in fact, that was the point. Our businesses were thriving at a small size that was being totally ignored by conventional financing. And we weren't the only ones. It ended up the whole microenterprise and community development loan fund movement took off across the country. We had been working with the Blackfeet Bank, looking at getting other banks to do like loan to deposit ratios on there, to place monies in their bank. We began looking, because in Indian country there's not a silver bullet. Each reservation is different, each community has kind of different aspects that you can build on and counter. And so in looking at this, we had, I think we had like 20 some community development financial tribal institutions under some form of startup or operation by the time that the CDFI legislation came through. And Clinton, when he became
Explain the CDFI.
CDFIs were the community development financial institutions that were all put together under that banner were like community credit unions, community banks, the microloan funds we were doing, a lot of the housing lending, mortgage lending people in the low-income communities. So it was a range of different financial institutions that were gearing their operations to match the economy in the community where they were setting up, which was the first time anybody really began, well, maybe I shouldn't say the first, but it was the first organized, systematic questioning of our financial systems and what were their purpose and what was their use if this was an entire group of people left out of the market. It had always been considered conventionally, or conventional banking, let me put it that way, conventional banking, thinking that poor people were not creditworthy. And we were absolutely proving that poor people were creditworthy.
That was a major point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when they had that big crash, 2009, the community development financial institution were doing okay,
Right.
as everything else tanked. No matter what we've seen in the financial market is a strong tendency to continue to do status quo and to actually become defensive and attack any kind of new, like the community financial institutions were a threat to existing conventional banking. It required them to think. And I can't think of anything more boring than I think that's why they get so much money, because who could survive that kind of boredom on a day-to-day basis? This is not a hard job. No. You got a cookie cutter template and you move your money out. You begin looking at what's your role as a bank, and then you've got to really question the setup. Where you're putting your money. So it really started raising a lot of fundamental development questions that we needed raised throughout the country. And in my early years, I was probably thinking that this was just for us, for Native communities. I mean, when I was in the school movement, we wanted our own schools. And so I was probably a little bit of the mind of almost segregationist in a way, that we're building our own communities, we're building our own schools. Because we already knew we had rejected the values. It's not that Indian people can't do business. It's they don't value profit over community. They don't value profit over life. So we were never going to succeed by their metrics, because a tree only has value once it's cut down and it's board feet on the market. And so if you care about trees, you can't succeed in that economy. And this was becoming more and more apparent the more First Nations began understanding and listening better, and really looking at down the road, we'll never have the success they're looking for. So we basically would get ahead of it. We designed our own valuation techniques so that we could actually assign value and assess success based on the change in the assets. Like increasing control of assets, increasing assets, using assets to leverage, creating assets. We began to track our own success based on asset development. And it allowed us to bring the cultural piece in a way that we couldn't before. One of the things about the Lakota Fund that I used to say a lot was that it was our biggest success and it was our biggest failure. And people would ask, what do you mean failure? And my point in the story was, if you look at the beginning and how it evolved, it was really driven by indigenous leadership, indigenous conversation, dialogue, and problem solving. And once it really took off the ground, all of a sudden it became a copycat to the Grameen Bank. And it became this, we did what Dr. Eunice did, you're doing the Grameen Bank. And it was both an answer of yes and no. Because the no was very important. People missed the fact this was indigenous problem solving that created the Lakota Fund before we'd even heard about the Grameen Bank. And it was that way of thinking that I wanted to continue to harness and bring into contemporary application and also to scale. So as the Lakota Fund was up and making its loans, I was approached by a Wayne Silby and a John Guffey, not to call them A, they were nice men, two men called John Guffey and Wayne Silby, and they were the founders of the Calvert Social Investment Fund. And this is about mid-90s, and they had heard about the Lakota Fund, and they were looking under their mutual fund umbrella at some way to work with poor people was their idea. Now here were these two rich white guys coming up to me, and I'm thinking, mutual fund, I think I know what one is. Okay, got it. Okay, listen, they want me to be on the board. This will be wild. And I was like, okay. And boom, I went on the board, not knowing exactly how a mutual fund worked, but having an incredible lawyer who was our counsel, an independent counsel who worked with me. And one of the things I would talk about at the first board meeting was poor people being credit worthy. And they had said that they thought they could take, and they had a couple examples, because one of the board members was very keen on looking at this issue, and the one that had kept it alive. And he had taken a small couple $100,000, which is peanuts in the mutual fund portfolios, and put them into some of the low housing loan funds up in the Northwest. And I was like, we could create an intermediary or a sort of think tank around democratizing the financial systems. And one of the things that they talked about was doing something like the Lakota Fund on a national scale, only getting the investors into it. So we weren't real clear about it, but I ended up, again, writing up the business plan for looking at taking 1% of our portfolio and investing it directly into the community development financial institutions. Well, we had to clear SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, which was a riot, explaining that our investment statement, some of the purpose of our investments were society well-being, and the Securities Exchange Commission was like, what is this societal well-being? You know, how do you have societal well-being? And we'd have to explain this stuff. And then they would, and now we were doing this investment into low-income loan funds, and we're saying poor people are creditworthy. The SEC was just wanting to run when they saw us coming up there. So we worked through the hoops. We had to have the shareholders approve this type of investment so we could put it on our proxy statement. We had a shareholder meeting, and it was fascinating. I got up and I presented some stories from the Lakota Fund, and I talked about the fact that the private sector had no vehicle for investing in these kinds of loan funds that worked with communities. And we wanted to experiment with our shareholders, and could we use 1% of our portfolio for this kind of high social impact investing? And I used the term high social impact. And one of the ladies grabbed the microphone and she said, I want to do 5%. And then another lady said, we could go more than that. And I'm standing there. Now remember, I'm not quite sure how we're going to do this yet. And I'm kind of thinking, for the first time in my life, I'm going to be more moderate and not as radical. And I'm not quite sure how to get there. But then Wayne Silby, the chairman, got up with me, and we both ended up saying, let's try 1%. Just like that, voted unanimously through. And so there, overnight, we had several hundreds of millions of dollars. And that was such an eye-opener to realize that we created this high social impact investment within our mutual fund. Well, then as it grew and we got more sophisticated, and the due diligence on these investments was extensive, and I happened to be the only one that could do it at the time, so I was doing these things and getting them into the pipeline. And then we decided to move it over to the foundation, the Calvert, which is now called Capital Strategies. Calvert Capital Strategies is a separate foundation, but it allowed us more flexibility to work on an asset class in the market. This was the only private sector vehicle for individual investors to invest in these kinds of community financial institutions. And we were able to get FDIC status of it insured, and it became a class of its own. It's community notes. So anybody can go to a broker or themselves just say, I want to invest in community notes. And we have literally billions of dollars now flowing through the market into these low-income. So these principles of wide distribution of wealth, multi-income generating, scale, all from an indigenous economy were applied in the design of the community notes that became the major investment vehicle for all the community development financial institutions.
Rebecca, the changes you have wrought.
Well, that's a neat story because it's taking indigenous principles and taking it right into the belly of the beast.
Yes, and supersizing them.
Yeah. It's that
Fantastic.
contemporary application. There's brilliance there.
Yeah.
Brilliance, Jen, that people just, they don't even listen to us, let alone acknowledge. They want sustainability. The answers are right in our communities. The whole economic system doesn't work for indigenous people. When you see the world holistically and you see your job as living in balance and harmony, these are fundamental design principles of an indigenous economy versus the kind of competition and maximum yield principles that you're looking at that are structured into the existing. And so in Western economy, you get money if you need money, which is why a bank loans to rich people, but not to poor people, because what's rewarded is the accumulation. The system is designed to reward accumulation, so if you already have it, you get more. Versus seeing a system designed for creative development, where you're looking at both the unlimited kinds of creative ideas that can come out of the entrepreneurship, the natural entrepreneurship of people in their environment to solve their own problems is the basis of entrepreneurism. So that's the lessons we were learning in the Lakota Fund, and as we continued to work, we began to understand it more and more.